With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Americans love using their credit cards, the most secure and hassle-free way to pay. But DC politicians want to change that with the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill. This bill lets corporate megastores pick how your credit card is processed, allowing them to use untested payment networks that jeopardize your data security and rewards. Corporate megastores will make more money, and you pay the price. Tell Congress to guard your card, because Americans lose when politicians choose. Learn more at guardyourcard.com.
Hello, Rag Squad. When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Allo or Allbirds or Aviator Nation, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand and brilliant marketing, but an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the businesses, making selling, and for shoppers, buying, simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, who are home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret secret with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning that there are way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going... So, if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. It's no secret, businesses that want to grow with Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/ranks, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/ranks to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/ranks.
Jack.
Sam.
It's time to get our hooks into a topic I feel like we have been quietly hinting at for a while now. Exactly how good are Bayern Munich?
This is as impressive a performance as I've seen.
But they have started to look like this shabby backline again, and that isn't good news for Vincent Kompany.
The match ball goes to the Barcelona captain, who has surely just put this game out of the reach of Bayern Munich.
The biggest problem I think Bayern have is that when Bayern are not at it, they're miles off it. Bayern, for me, look lost.
That is what the Bayern fans pay their money to see. And that puts the icing on the cake for Bayern. No stopping them today.
Hello everybody and welcome to the latest episode of The Truth. I am your host, Sam Tighe, and that guy right there is not Dougie Critchley. It's Jack Collins. Hello, Jack.
Hello, Sam. Thank you for having me.
What are you doing in that seat? Where is Dougie? What have you done with him?
Yeah, I've binned him off so I could get out of the producer's chair. After last week, I decided it was changed. No, he's on holiday, so I'm stepping in on hallowed turf, as they say, to sit with you and have a discussion. And I'm looking forward to it, Sam.
I didn't realise we could switch chairs. Can we switch my chair out in the studio? Because I can't work out how to stop it from like rocking back and forward. I can't do the levers.
Yeah, you can do the buttons next time. You can control the video feed.
Oh God, can you imagine that? Unbelievable. Yeah, Dougie is on holiday. He forgot to tell us. When did he tell us? Directly after we recorded last week's episode. So usually in that scenario, we'd have one in the bank and we'd be ready. But lackadaisical Dougie did not give us the heads up and we didn't have time. So it's just Jack and I today, and it feels like good old times, at least for now. We'll see how we get on, shall we?
Yeah, let's play by ear.
Let's talk Bayern Munich. And the question we are effectively asking ourselves here is exactly how good are they? Because I think it's been a question that's difficult to answer throughout the season. And we're getting to the point now where we do kind of need some answers because we're on the verge of March. And of course, depending on the answer to the first question, it might prompt a second one, which is, are they legitimate Champions League contenders? So I think for this debate, we can start domestically. Always feels like a good barometer. And so I'm effectively going to ask you this, Jack. Bayern are 8 points clear at the top of the Bundesliga. So they are 8 points clear of Leverkusen, who went unbeaten last year, got 90 points, won the title. Does that mean that Bayern are comfortably the best German side right now? Because that is what the league table seems to indicate.
Yeah, the question, isn't it? Does the league table lie?
Usually the answer is no.
I think the answer is no. The league table doesn't lie. But are Bayern definitely the best side in Germany? I think there are question marks over that. What we have learned, I think, this season is that the Bundesliga is probably not the be-all and end-all with Bayern, because it hides a couple of things and topics we can get into. And ultimately, I do think this side are a reflection of their manager, and that's something that we'll look into and address. But what the Bundesliga does show us, and what we can kind of answer without any doubt whatsoever, is that Bayern have improved from where they have been in the last couple of years. Because, right, they fluked the title in 22-23. Let's be honest about it. You know, It came from Borussia Dortmund blowing it on the final day, and they ended up winning the title. They'd already decided they were moving on from their manager, etc., etc., etc. There was a lot of dramatics in 22-23. 23-24, things got a whole lot worse, and they ended up losing that league title, and they finished third in the table behind Bayer Leverkusen, you say, who had an absolute all-timer of a season, and that shouldn't be forgotten, but also below Stuttgart, who were good, but not supersonic in the same kind of way. But as we sit here now, Bayern, they have an 8-point lead in the table. And that is tangible and real improvement. And I think it's why last year it felt like there was this sense of sort of amateur dramatics that seemed to permeate everything that was to do with Bayern Munich. And this season, things seem quieter. They seem calmer. Everybody seems to be pulling a little bit more in the right direction. And a lot of that, and a lot of the credit for that, must go down to Vincent Kompany. However, I don't think that means that they're perfect. But I'm intrigued as to what you think about this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to pull up some supporting stats, because no matter what you may think of Bayern Munich, 8 points is a big gap, especially on a very good Leverkusen side who, all right, it's not gone perfectly for them this year. They haven't quite managed to find all those last-minute winners, but they still put up a very solid effort. Bayern's goal difference is plus 50. They average 65% possession per game, which is 7% more than the next contender, which is Dortmund. 19.2 shots per game, which is roughly 3 more than Leverkusen. Best pass accuracy, most aerials won. Harry Kane's top of the goal-scoring charts, 6 clear of Patrick Schick. Like, all of the top-level statistics suggest to you that Bayern are having by far the best season in the Bundesliga. So that 8-point gap feels justified. And just handpicking a couple of games, since the winter break, the underlying numbers are insanely good, right? They came back from the break, they beat Gladbach 1-0, but their XG was 4.3 in the game, and their XGA was 0.4. Hoffenheim were beaten 5-0, and Bayern conceded an XGA of 0.2 in that game. Werder Bremen were beaten 3-0, an XGA of 0.1. I mean, this is absolutely like ridiculous shutdown dynamics. And they beat Eintracht Frankfurt at the weekend 4-0. XG was 3.8 to 0.5. Now that is I've handpicked some really good games for them here. But just to show you that I think more often than not on a weekly basis here in Germany, they are absolutely destroying teams. And yet, everyone that I follow on social media that covers Bayern and covers the Bundesliga weekly and for a living, they've got these nagging doubts about whether or not Bayern are genuinely as good as they're being hyped up to be, or as these underlying numbers might suggest. Now, these numbers might suggest that the Bundesliga is feeling pretty weak in the middle right now, and that's more the story rather than Bayern being utterly dominant and brilliant. But why is it, do you think, Jack, that people like, so let's argue that Stefan Biankowski and Manu Vates from Transfermarkt who cover Bayern and watch them every, why don't they think, like, what's nagging them? What's bothering them about this Bayern side?
Yeah, and someone like a Seb Stafford-Bloor, who's brilliant at The Athletic, very similar, I think, in terms of where they feel about it. I don't want to necessarily bring this to Leverkusen and where they're at, but I think it's probably worth pointing out just before we begin that, the difference in the table is 8 points. Both teams have lost one game, right? But Leverkusen have drawn 4 games more than Bayern over the course of this season, right? If you look at the start of the season, Leverkusen started the season with this kind of very weird penalty shootout cup win over Stuttgart in the Pokal, in the Super Cup. Then they beat Gladbach with a last-minute goal on the opening day of the season. Everyone's like, they're going to do it again.
Classic.
It's just happening again. But then in the next couple of weeks, so they lose their game. The game that they lose in the Bundesliga this season, Leverkusen, is on the 31st of August. And they lose 3-2 to RB Leipzig. Then in the next couple of weeks, they draw with Bayern. Obviously, that counts for both. But they also then draw with Holstein Kiel at the start of October. They draw with Werder Bremen at the end of October. They draw with Stuttgart at the start of November. And a week later, they draw with Bochum. And you're kind of looking at going, well, that's the difference. That's the difference in the league table right now. So since the sort of 9th of November, should we say, onwards, these two teams have been kind of neck and neck. The difference, that 8 points in the table comes from that early, really kind of poor start to the season from a Leverkusen perspective, especially given what they did last year. Now, that's natural. You expect a little bit of a drop-off. There was a change in some personnel there as well. And it took a little while for Xabi Alonso to really kind of gain control of things. Since then, it's been pretty good, right? So I think that the feeling that Bayern might not be the best side in the country, as opposed to Leverkusen, despite being 8 points clear of them, comes from this idea that Leverkusen actually started slowly, and since then it's been relatively level, added to the fact that Xabi Alonso has never lost to Bayern in his Leverkusen managerial career. And we saw Leverkusen knock Bayern out of the DFB Pokal. We saw them batter them, really, and end up drawing 0-0, but in terms of the way that the game played out the other week. So that's where I think this comes from, right? So because normally, if you or I were sitting there and we were trying to explain to someone why a team 8 points clear at the top of the table were not that much better than team 8 points below them, people would be looking at you like you're stupid. And so Bayern deserve credit for starting the season well, kicking onwards and taking advantage of the situation that was there. But are they streets ahead of Leverkusen right now? No, not for me. So I think that that's probably where this discussion point comes from. And whilst you can point to that Bundesliga form, I think there's also kind of a feeling that their inconsistency in Europe has probably contributed to this discussion point. But something that I've been thinking about, and it probably goes back to what you were saying there about the, those games where they've really been dominant. And I said at the start that they're a reflection of their manager. Now, last week when we were talking about underrated coaches in Europe, and we were talking about Simone Inzaghi and what was going on, one of the names you pulled out was Vincent Kompany.
Not with too much conviction, to be clear, but it was on my short list.
But I pulled a face.
Yeah, you did, yeah.
One of the things that I've kind of struggled with is that I think that Vincent Kompany will come on to become a very, very good manager. I think he's really intelligent. I think that he reads the game quite well. Obviously, what we know from him as a player was someone who was able to influence the game in a variety of areas of the pitch from his kind of captain's position. And I imagine he'll be able to do similar from the dugout, but he's not there yet. And I think that what we've learned from his time in England, and we can use that as a point of reference because obviously that's really the majority of his managerial experience that people will know of. His Burnley side in the Championship, when they were the best side and they had the best players, or at least close to the best players, were phenomenal. They dominated games, they racked up scorelines, they played some really nice football, and they blew teams away and ran away at the top of the Championship. When that team moved into the Premier League, they struggled against teams who are of a higher caliber or a similar caliber to them, who had a real distinct tactical plan that basically flew in the face of what they were trying to do from their own perspective. And I don't think there's loads changed since he's come to Bayern. I think that Bayern, when they are the dominant side, play some lovely, pretty patterns, and they can absolutely blow teams away with their speed of movement, with their incision. But when they come up against teams who are, just as good as them or have a very clever tactical plan, someone like a Mainz just before Christmas, they can fall apart. And ultimately, I don't think that we've got to a point with Kompany yet that we've moved on past the original kind of pitfalls of where he was at. That's also okay. Like sometimes I think people think about that and be like, right, they'll have to change. It's all right. Grow with the manager. You can build. And I think the Kompany feels like the kind of coach who might, in a couple of years, go on to be a very, very, a high contender for one of those kind of top young coaches in the game. Now, maybe he's got this gig a little bit early, but actually you can grow with a manager. And it is something that the Bayern, I think, will look to do. So this isn't necessarily a problem, just an observation.
Yeah. So talking of teams that have tripped him up, teams that may have a plan and be his kryptonite there are clearly some examples here of what you're talking about that have occurred through the season. Many of them have happened outside of the Bundesliga, so again speaks to the point. There was obviously one in the Bundesliga recently. It was the Leverkusen game that you just suggested that Leverkusen should have won. The underlying numbers agree. Bayern Munich's XG on the night was 0. I mean,
they're not great.
I mean, what? And obviously the big storyline coming out of that game was Xabi Alonso waited a very, very long time to throw a natural striker on, and had he done so 10 minutes before, probably would have had the game wrapped up, and this title race would be considered alive and kicking rather than mostly dead and or fossilized, which is kind of the way we're talking about it right now. That is the difference. That was a huge chance for Leverkusen, and they did all the right things except for the bit that you really have to do in football. It's really important. You have to put the ball in the back of the net. But that was an example maybe of Kompany being outcoached. Yeah, maybe, genuinely. And then we have others to draw upon too, because there have been struggles in the Champions League this season. And I'll go to the most recent example first. It was Celtic. Bayern really struggled to put Celtic away in the playoff. And I was really surprised by this because, I just watched Villa play Celtic and I didn't see a scenario where Celtic would be able to put up so much of a fight against Bayern when they conceded 4 against Villa, and it probably should have been more. Ollie Watkins slipped over while taking a penalty. It wasn't a particularly commanding defensive performance. I didn't think they'd have it in them. And yet the energy and the belief that Celtic showed on the night, it didn't look like something that Bayern were particularly accustomed to and weren't particularly well equipped with, especially the energy element, which I think we'll touch on again later when we ask questions about the squad. Obviously, there's the Feyenoord loss as well. They got absolutely dismantled by Barcelona earlier this season, which really showed us a red line, I think, for Bayern. And of course, they lost to Villa, who kind of epitomised what you were talking about, which is a smart team with a good game plan. And they tripped them up. And yes, they needed Emi Martinez to bail them out at the end to make sure it was a win rather than a draw. And of course, Barcelona needed a Rafinha hat-trick to really stick the nail in. Not everyone has these players. But as we get towards the sharp end of the season and you ask yourself, are Bayern in Champions League contention? Guess what, buddy? There's a Rafinha on every team from here. And if you can't deal with those players, then you're not necessarily going to get to where you need to go. I have noticed a complaint with Bayern, which is they do at times struggle for that. It's kind of quite a strange thing to say, but breaking down that deep block can be a little bit difficult at times. And there have been some question marks recently about Harry Kane, which is something I really wanted to ask you about here. Because again, it's like on face value, 35 goals and assists in the Bundesliga and the Champions League this season. I mean, on paper, it's an utterly dominant season from Harry Kane. Yet the questions are, and they keep popping up, and I'm sure you remember these, Jack, from when he was in England, because they're the same damn questions.
I know what's coming, yeah.
Is he dropping too deep? Is he hogging the focus of the attack? And can he decide those big games? 9 of those 21 Bundesliga goals are penalties. So if you actually, that's a huge number of penalties, and fair play to the guy. He scored all 9. He is unreal at taking penalties. But if you strip them out, actually the goal tally starts to look a bit more modest. And he's been limping around a bit. He's obviously ended up injured. He missed the weekend. They looked unreal against Eintracht.
Yeah.
We are not going to sit here and say that Bayern are better off without Harry Kane. But are those very familiar issues starting to pop up? And are they actually going to trip Bayern up?
Americans love using their credit cards, the most secure and hassle-free way to pay. But DC politicians want to change that with the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill. This bill lets corporate megastores pick how your credit card is processed, allowing them to use untested payment networks that jeopardize your data security and rewards. Corporate megastores will make more money, and you pay the price. Tell Congress to guard your card, because Americans lose when politicians choose. Learn more at guardyourcard.com.
Hello, Rag Squad. When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Aloe or Allbirds or Aviator Nation, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand and brilliant marketing, but an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the businesses, making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, who are home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning that way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going. So, if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. It's no secret, businesses that want to grow with Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/ranks, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/ranks to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/ranks. I think that, when you come to the game against Eintracht, you probably should note that it was Thomas Müller who replaced Harry Kane at the top of the pitch, right? And Thomas
Who hates
Müller
playing that role.
I was going to say, Thomas Müller is hardly the striker who's stretching over the top and opening up space for the number 10, is he? He's also a player that likes to drop in deep and link play and ghost into positions. So I don't know. Was he
sitting on the centre-back's toes? Because I've watched a few Bayern games recently where Kane is like, mate, you're playing next to Kimmich. What are you doing?
No, I think that you can look at this from a variety of angles, right? And I'm not either going to sit here and be like, Harry Kane has been a bad thing, because he definitely hasn't for Bayern Munich, and what he's brought to the team feels like a sense of stability in that attack, and he does feel like he scores pretty much every game. Now, whether that's from the spot or not, slightly different question. But what I do think is interesting is that actually maybe the focal point here is Kane, but it actually maybe shouldn't be, because what he's doing, dropping into these areas and opening up spaces and bringing others into the attack, yes, you could put it in a way that makes it look negative in terms of hogging the ball in those areas and looking to be the link man and the kind of lightning rod through which everything works. But equally, what it is doing is opening up spaces for these wide players to attack. And if you have players who are taking advantage of those situations, people stop asking questions of the number 9, right? And maybe that's about squad build, and maybe it's about natural fits, and all of those things are fine. And actually, I thought that the reason that Bayern shredded Eintracht at the weekend was because Jamal Musiala did one of those I'm absolutely unplayable days. And when he does those, well, he's unplayable. So it does feel like there are certain situations, and kind of, to roll the conversation. I think we'll come back to Kane on this, but I do think it's interesting that, you mentioned a few of those games and those game plans that have tripped up Bayern Munich. And, you come to what Villa did, and I think that this is it. A lot of teams took that and went, yeah, all right, well, that's how you do it then. That's how you block off this Bayern team. That's how you stop them from being at their very best. And Feyenoord then did it probably to the best degree that we've seen. In that game, Bayern had 80% of the ball. I think the overall statistics were towards the end of that game. They made over 700 passes, and you're kind of looking at it, 30 shots on goal, and they don't score, and they concede 3. And that inability to be able to deal with transitions is a huge part of this, right? And Celtic then took that as a blueprint, and Celtic were nowhere near as clinical as Feyenoord were on that day, and nowhere near as good defensively as Feyenoord were on that day. Bayern were also less bad. So, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other in some ways. But I do think that when you're looking at this as a whole, to kind of lay the blame at Harry Kane when he's come in and done exactly what he was always going to do, right? It's not like you sign Harry Kane and go, right, there you go, stretch the defense. We need you to run in behind those. So I don't think you can sit there and blame Harry Kane for that, because if you buy Harry Kane, you build the attack around him because he's Harry Kane and look what he's put out as an output. But also, it's not like Harry Kane has completely changed his game here and is suddenly doing things that he wasn't doing beforehand, and therefore you could lay the blame at his door for doing those things. That is the player you signed.
Yep.
So I think that whilst you could have genuine concerns about maybe the fact that it's a little bit too congested in the middle and teams can just set up that deep block, but also know that if you funnel them wide and see what they can put and see what they can do. And the answer was, again, Celtic in particular, not a lot, right? There was a lot of wild crosses into the box. Obviously, Kasper Schmeichel had a good game as well. It should be remembered. It wasn't just, Bayern were completely impotent, but there just didn't feel like there were too many different options to actually make things happen. And, you come to this game at the weekend and suddenly Eintracht did come out and have a go at the start of that second half. They concede late in the first half, although Bayern were the better side for the most of it. And then they come out at the start of the second half. They tried to claw themselves back into the game. They perhaps should claw themselves back into the game, and Bayern kind of run riot in the space that opens up. And you're like, okay, fine. If games are going to be really open end to end, then you should be able to take advantage of it. But it just feels like teams are able to nullify them through the middle, and suddenly things are difficult. And I think that takes us on, to a slightly different question, which isn't necessarily the struggles in Europe or what's happening, but, actually where this squad is at and whether there are certain elements of it that need a refresh. Now, we know that there have been new contracts for Jamal Musiala, which was a big, big one for Bayern Munich, one for Alphonso Davies, which I also think is pretty important. And it
I was
looked
surprised that they managed to get Davies to commit. Actually, it kind of felt like he was drifting off to Real Madrid for a while, and they managed to get it done. And the questions over Musiala with the release clause that kicks in at a certain point, but you don't need to worry about that right now.
No.
Right, you really don't have to worry about that. Right, all that matters right now is that you've secured the services of possibly the best young 10 in football for the next X years, and that was coming into question. So well done to them, but.
And maybe maybe the best left back in football, or at least someone in the conversation, right? So both of those are good. But look at the kind of old guard, if you will, right? So Leon Goretzka has felt like he's been slightly surplus to requirements for some time now, and we've known for ages that the Kimmich Goretzka midfield pairing as a double pivot doesn't work. If you had two of them in the three, maybe fine, but actually as a pair, it doesn't work. And either of them with Pavlovic seems to work a whole lot better. But Kimmich and Pavlovic in particular seems to be the key to them kind of moving forward. And that's not even bringing Paulinho into the picture, who's kind of struggled for minutes. I know there's been injuries, et cetera, et cetera. But, you look at Leon Goretzka, look at Leroy Sané, who's been hot and cold for, one, the majority of his career, but two, I definitely think over the last couple of years at Bayern. Serge Gnabry started this season really well and has drifted off. Kingsley Coman is still a wonderful servant to the club, but equally feels like he's someone that is rotated in and out because there's a lack of consistency there. And then obviously Manuel Neuer, who will continue in goal, you'd imagine for the time being, but not forever. And Thomas Muller, who we mentioned earlier. It does feel like that's quite a big core of the side that potentially needs either refreshing or changing, not maybe immediately, but in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, to put some ages to those players that you've mentioned, Sané, Gnabry, 29 each. Neuer is 36, Goretzka is 30, but I think we've been aware that he's been past his best for a good few years now. And physically have really slowed down a couple of years ago. Let's face facts. It's been obvious that they've been trying to get rid of Goretzka for a couple of years now, and he's just either hung on or no one's been interested. Muller's 35, Kane is 31, Kimmich is now 30.
Yeah.
And
Kimmich's still playing at a very high level.
I don't want to say 30 is old because it's not, but like Kimmich has been playing a lot of football, ever since he was 17, 18, etc., etc. And Neuer is 36 now. And he has now effectively publicly accepted that he is going to have to start to sacrifice some games to try to hand over the crown to the next in line for Bayern Munich as they finally genuinely take the successorship of the goalkeeper seriously. It's kind of been a conversation that's been hanging over Neuer for a long time now. It's been a really awkward one. Ever since he broke his leg skiing, it's basically been something that's nipped away at him and the club. And they've been it's hard, isn't it, to work these scenarios out when you've got a genuine modern legend of the club, a player who changed sport really with the way he played the goalkeeper position. And he's still pretty good. He's just not as good as he was. He's just quite injury prone these days. And you're trying to kind of find a solution when he's 35, 36, but you don't want to upset the guy. And maybe that's where Bayern have been with a few of these guys. And one more to add is, you didn't mention him, but as a role player, Guerreiro, has been pretty good for Bayern. Good moments, 31. I guess my question, is this squad skewing a little bit old compared to some of the teams that you're effectively putting them up against when it comes to, can you win the Champions League? Because Real Madrid don't skew particularly old in their core. Like Mbappe, Bellingham, Vinicius, Rodrigo, Tchouaméni, Valverde, the list goes on. They're prime age players. Like they're all in their prime or just ahead of their prime. And Liverpool have a Mohamed Salah who is like breaking records. It's quite
Mohamed
tough.
Salah almost doesn't count in these conversations, I think is probably where we're at this point. Like if you're still performing to the level that he's performing at, it's almost like you take everything else out of it. And that's fine. If these players that we're talking about here were dropping seasons like Mohamed Salah is, there would be no conversation to be had.
Yeah, but over their age particularly. Yeah,
exactly.
But that's not happening. And again, so Barcelona, you've got a lot of mid-20s here and a lot of very young players who are, Lamine Yamal and Pedri and Gavi, and these guys are like, I mean, we're not talking about the same scenario here. So almost I feel like the conclusion I came to while taking a look at all of this is that are Bayern by far the best team in Germany? No, they're probably the best, but
over the course of this season, they have been the best team. Are they the best team right now as we talk about it? Up for debate.
It's arguable. It's arguable. And can they really hold a candle to some of the teams that I just mentioned there? Would they actually stand up to Barcelona earlier on this season? The answer was no. Would the same thing happen again? Possibly. Real Madrid, Liverpool, would you back them to beat Bayern? Yeah, I think I would. And you look at those players, and we've just listed them all off, and no one's denying that these guys are either good or very good. But is that enough? Are we at the point where very good, unfortunately for Bayern here, is just not enough because it's not as good as what the others can suggest? And I think that's where I ended up. They're very good, but they're not an elite team. And if they had prime Jupp Heynckes in charge who could create the perfect framework, then maybe that elevates them. But Kompany, as we've discussed, is also learning on the job here, and he has his foibles, and this team has its weaknesses. So, Jack, it sounds like we're roughly in agreement as to where Bayern sit in the hierarchy of European football.
I'm just thinking, Sam, in terms of what you're saying about age profiles here, and I thought I would just have a look at it. You're kind of expecting there to be a few names in here who are coming into their peak ages. And look, obviously there is Alexander Pavlovic, who we've mentioned before, who's 20 years old, who's very, very exciting at this
Lovely
point.
Player.
I think is going to be a wonderful footballer. There's Jamal Musiala, who's 21, who is wonderful, as we know, and Michael Elise, who's 23, who's been a stunning addition.
Yep.
Then Alphonso Davies is 24, played a lot of football, fine, but he's still in that kind of before peak category. And Stanisic, who was brilliant on loan at Leverkusen last season, is 24 as well. Then you start to come into the real prime ages of where players should be already at their peak. Hiroki Ito came in from Stuttgart in the summer. I'm a big, big fan of his. Can play centre back or at left back, and I think
very
he's going to be
unlucky with an injury, didn't he?
He did, got really, really unlucky, but he's back now and starting to show his quality. Upamecano's in there at 26. Conrad Limer's 27. Kim Min-jae is 28, Kingsley Coman 28, as you say. And then suddenly you're into the kind of, okay, either at the end of the peak or into the twilight years. And there's a lot of players in there. We're talking about your Comans and your Sanes and your Nabries. Polina's in there, and he only arrived in the summer. Kimmich into that category. Goretzka, Eric Dyer, who's 31 and is still playing quite a good amount of minutes at this point, and played at the weekend and was very good, actually. Rafael Guerreiro, who came in from Borussia Dortmund, 31, came 31, Müller 35, and Neuer 38. It's quite a small squad in some ways. And I know that there are players who are obviously playing for Bayern's second team and also out on loan at a variety of places. We saw Gabriel Vidovic go out to Mainz and come back from loan at the end of January. But it doesn't feel like there's players here who are screaming to get into the squad from those kind of perspectives either. And I think that that's important because when the core of your side, and look, we've talked about this with Manchester City, right? And the fact that you see a core of a side getting old and suddenly one or two key pieces getting injured and things really, really start to look bad. And there are some similarities to draw. And I don't mean to do this because Kompany obviously has such a history of Manchester City. But I do think that in terms of where the problems are for Bayern Munich, they're not miles off what City are seeing. They're probably less focused on the actual midfield, although I do think that with Pavlovic out, it did feel like they were quite easy to get at through the centre. But also, if you run at these centre-backs, a lot of them don't like it, right? I mean, we've talked about this with Upamecano for a while. He has a mistake in him. Some wonderful performances as well. Obviously, we saw at Leipzig that he had some incredible performances that, one, got him the move to Bayern, and two, means that he shouldn't be written off at this point. But he has had mistakes in him. Obviously,
you're going to struggle to find anyone that's watched enough football over the last few years who could 100% put their life on Upamecano to just have a totally normal game of football at the top level. There's always that part of you that just wonders. And so that's not what you want from one of the handful, let's say, of those prime age players that you've presented, because there aren't that many of them. And if you can pick holes in some of them, then you do start to get a little bit worried, right?
Yeah, I mean, also the Kim Min-jae move hasn't been perfect. I think he's been fine, but okay. he hasn't set the world on fire. Obviously they brought in Matthijs de Ligt, and he decided that enough was enough. They decided enough was enough and moved him on to Manchester United, where he's hardly pulled up trees. And that leaves you with a couple of different options in there, but none that are screaming out. I think that Ito is probably the best of that bunch, if I'm being perfectly honest with you, considering what we've seen from him in the Bundesliga. But it's not like you're looking at that and thinking, wow, that's an absolutely rock solid centre-back core that we're going to be able to build on. And you kind of hoped, or I kind of hoped, that when Kompany came into this Bayern Munich team, the one thing he'd be able to do was kind of get the best out of some of these centre-backs. And I know it doesn't always work like this, that some players who are long ball merchants, I'm looking at you, Russell Martin, become, the intricate ball-playing managers who really want to play in a very, very exact style. So I know it's not always like that, but you would expect that with players of that who definitely have talent and high ceilings, all of these centre-backs that we've seen at various places that haven't really been Bayern go on to be excellent in various systems, I'd kind of assume that Kompany was going to find something to get the best out of them. And I've kind of struggled to see it in the bigger games. Maybe this game against Eintracht at the weekend aside, and even that had Eric Dyer slotting back in there just to give them a bit of stability.
Yeah, indeed. It prompts a lot of questions. It really does. And I do think that they are sort of caught between cycles a bit, and they haven't been able to make the moves they want to. It's really obvious they know where their future lies. Judge them by their actions. They've moved heaven and earth to get Alphonso Davies and Jamal Musiala back signed up for the long term. And they are letting a contract such as, let's go with Leroy Sané, they're letting that run and run. Like, what percentage chance do you think that they're going to re-sign Leroy Sané is at this point in the summer? Like, it's got to be low.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because he is on a ton of money.
That's also weird. Like, they should be able to sell Leroy Sané for like a fee. Leroy Sané is hot and cold, as we say, but he's still a good player, and wingers are in demand around Europe, and Leroy Sané is going to have his pick of clubs.
He is. That's fine. But they were never going to re-sign him because they committed so much money to him. I mean, I've seen reports that he's on like 25 million a year, euros that is, but it's still an absolutely astronomical amount for Leroy Sané and what he's actually produced. As you say, hot and cold is probably the way to describe him. That will be about what Kane's on, and Kane cost 100 million. So they made a bet there with Sané. They wanted to bring one of Germany's best players back to Germany, as Bayern love to do, and it hasn't really worked out. And you get the impression that even for Bayern Munich, that kind of contract has really held them back in terms of fully recycling what they want to do. And I'll put Leon Goretzka in that conversation as well, someone that they've probably wanted to move on from, but have just struggled to do so. So if you do get laboured with those big contracts, it can bite even the best teams. And it's probably meant that Bayern aren't really where they want to be. And, they know where they want to be. And Musiala and Davies is the future is that. But they've had to wait an awful long time to move on from some of the other pieces. And it's, in comparison, with Real Madrid, with Barcelona, with Liverpool, it's quite clearly held them back. Jack, I want to finish off with a quick question, a quick fire question for you, which is, how intriguing is this Bayern Munich, Bayer Leverkusen Champions League round of 16 game? Because usually I don't like all domestic affairs at this earlier stage of the knockouts. I feel like they go a bit stale. But Bayern against Leverkusen here is such an opportunity for Leverkusen, I think, that it just puts Bayern in the crosshairs here. They can't really do anything right here other than do what you would expect them to do. I think there's so much peril attached to this game for them.
Yeah, I mean, what's really, really interesting, I think, is kind of the way you're looking at it and going, okay, so to begin with, Leverkusen have the second leg at home at the Bayer Arena, which means that Bayern really, really need to get off to a good start. And they have been good at home, even if Celtic gave them a bit of a scare. You have to go back. You have to go back to 22-23, or actually the 30th of September, 2022, the last time that Bayern beat Bayer Leverkusen. They won that game 4-0. Since then, a 2-1 loss, a 2-2 draw, a 3-0 loss, a 1-1 draw, a 1-0 loss, a 0-0 draw. And now we have these next two games. And so you're looking at those, score lines under Xabi Alonso and thinking, well, if he maintains form, then Bayern go out of the Champions League. And obviously we did our Champions League round of 16 predictions and kind of rankings on the main podcast earlier this week on Ranks FC. And that, in that ranking, I had Bayer Leverkusen above Bayern Munich, and quite comfortably as well. Not kind of in the mix and this might happen, this might. I'm pretty confident that Bayer Leverkusen will come through this tie. And I think that you look at all of the things that we've seen and all of the evidence in front of us, including this season with that cup game that was in Munich and ended up being one of those kind of okay, right, what's going on here? How is this all playing out? And Leverkusen were really good that day as well. And that was before they found their groove in the same way that we've seen over the course of this year. That was with Florian Wirtz playing as a false nine. There were a lot of different random things happening in that season. But the way that they've gone about their business and the way that we've seen things this season, I've just been hugely impressed with what's gone down and how they've gone about facing Bayern. And when you put all of that into the context of, how this is shaking out, what it looks like, et cetera, it does feel like Bayern have themselves in a bit of a bind over Leverkusen. And that, Xabi Alonso, obviously former Bayern player, has a bit of a hold over them. And whilst they couldn't take advantage of that in the league game and kind of shorten the gap and all of that, and to be honest, I've made the call already that I think that the Bundesliga title is done, dusted, and that Bayern will not drop 8 points from here until the end of the season, even if Leverkusen went perfect, which I don't expect them to do. You kind of look at it and think, well, where are we in terms of the two sides? I think the two sides are probably on a bit of a par right now, in that Leverkusen do not feel quite as good as last season, and Bayern feel a lot better than last season, but still not up there in terms of the top teams in Europe from where I'm standing. So it feels like all of the things need to be fixed really quickly if Bayern are going to go on a Champions League run. And that would start with obviously getting this Leverkusen curse off their back. Now, if they can do that, then maybe that opens it up. Maybe suddenly that level of freedom starts to come through this team. And look, whilst you can sit here and we can all do it and predict the round of 16, predict the quarterfinals, things change as you go through it, right? And teams evolve and adapt as you get through this last kind of quarter of the season. People find solutions. And we've seen that from a variety of teams down the years in the Champions League who looked like they were miles off it and suddenly came through and you were like, how are they in a final? Look, Borussia Dortmund last season, right? Who were completely off the pace in the Bundesliga and hadn't convinced majorly in Europe. And then suddenly we're in the European final, having put together their real only decent performances the whole season in the knockout stages of the Champions League. So it's not impossible. But I do think that what we're seeing with this Bayern side is continued frailty to counterattacks. The fact that they just don't seem to be able to get the balance right in terms of the midfield and protecting that centre-back partnership, whoever that might be at a certain moment, and making sure that they're not gettable in those areas. And, a game plan against them that has worked continuously across the whole season by teams who have players of a similar caliber. And I think that when you put all of those things together, it would take something quite dramatic to shift in order for us to sit here and say that Bayern Munich could go and win the Champions League this season.
Well, I was going to ask you if you thought that they might be able to beat Inter should they get past Leverkusen, but it sounds like that's a pointless question because ultimately you've picked Leverkusen to continue the hold over
but
Bayern.
Like Inter feel like even worse for Bayern, right? Like you say, like if they manage to overturn this curse with Leverkusen, and look, they did not lose the last game, and that is worth pointing out. So, it's not like they're going in there being like, oh, we've been trashed the last 4 times. That's not how it's played out. They've just had a bit of a chokehold on it. But Inter feel like the kind of team that will be like, come on then, show us what you got. And we're going to just throw Denzel Dumfries down one wing at you and see how you collapse in on yourselves. Like, the path to the final would be incredibly difficult for Bayern. Yep. And sometimes that's a really good thing. And I've talked about this with PSG before. I feel certain teams need to be tested to kind of battle harden themselves. I think Bayern would have been far better with a route to the final that had given them a couple of soft draws and just allowed them to kind of warm up into this competition, because we've seen them fall apart at various points during European competition already. And they very nearly ended up, going all the distance with Celtic in order to get them past them. And Celtic are a team who are, one, well coached, but two, have such a significant deficit in terms of budget and players and quality towards this Bayern Munich side. And that, I think, is a worry. Although, you know what, they did get the job done. It did feel a little bit like, that with Bayern in years gone by, even though they didn't go and win the Champions League loads of times, you go back at it and you think, Bayern playing a team who are not as good as them in the Champions League, they're just going to walk it. Yeah, they might come up and it'll be a tough game and they might end up losing to a Real Madrid or a Barcelona or a Manchester City, whatever. But you kind of there was that feeling of expectation that surrounded Bayern when it came to teams who didn't have the same caliber of players that they did. Now that feeling is a little bit iffy when we're getting to Europe. And I think that what we've seen in the Champions League so far this season backs that up.
Yep, you've got a lack of trust in them, and I have to admit I share the same feeling. So I think we are in agreement there, mate. And I think that's a nice place to put a pin in it and stop, because all we can do now is further hammer the point home. And when Bayern actually end up beating Leverkusen over 2 legs
and winning the Champions League,
just look even more stupid. So thank you for joining me this week, mate.
No, it's been a real pleasure, Sam. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for just in advance editing, producing and uploading the recording, because while I've really enjoyed the conversation and while my cats clearly have lapped up every second, it's also important to me that other human beings hear it too. And I just want to take the opportunity to remind everyone that is what Jack does. He does all the hard work as well as providing the analysis. So thank you very much, mate. And to all the Bayern fans out there listening along thinking, nah, shut up, then obviously, if you guys do go ahead and beat Bayer Leverkusen or go ahead and win the Champions League, just come at us on socials. That's all part of the fun. Let us know how wrong we were. But we don't trust Bayern Munich. And there's nothing you can say that will change our minds between now and next Tuesday. Okay, see you next week, guys. Bye.
Americans love using their credit cards, the most secure and hassle-free way to pay. But DC politicians want to change that with the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill. This bill lets corporate megastores pick how your credit card is processed, allowing them to use untested payment networks that jeopardize your data security and rewards. Corporate megastores will make more money, and you pay the price. Tell Congress to guard your card, because Americans lose when politicians choose. Learn more at guardyourcard.com.
Hello, Rag Squad. When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Allo or Allbirds or Aviator Nation, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand and brilliant marketing, but an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the businesses, making selling, and for shoppers, buying, simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, who are home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not so secret with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning that there are way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going. So, if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. It's no secret, businesses that want to grow with Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/ranks, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/ranks to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/ranks.